This is Blackstone Joe, and you're listening to Slick Talk.
If I say I'm an oil man, you will agree.
There's the stink of oil about him.
Welcome to episode 101, aptly titled Report Writing 101. I hope you all are enjoying October so far. I'm not, personally. Strictly sports speaking. Just going to air out my pain a little bit. The Cubs missed the playoffs. We're looking at a tumultuous offseason with a lot of decisions to make and a lot of factors to consider. Not as many factors as we're going to consider in an oil report, of course. And, nevertheless, there are decisions to be made. And here we're going to talk about the decisions we make in a report with none other than Kristin Huff, Vice President of Blackstone Laboratories. Excited to have her on the show today. But before we get into that, I had a couple testimonials that I really just couldn't ignore because these came across my email, and I thought that many of you, especially folks who may be new to what oil analysis is, or perhaps you're wondering what all it can do for you, you want to see some real-world explanations of whether or not this is actually good stuff. Well, I got a twofer for the people because first off, we have Larry, owner of a BMW R1200. Larry writes that he thought he would let us know what happened after his report contained some high levels, specifically including silicon. So he took the airbox apart and he found that dust had indeed bypassed the filter, was heading directly into the throttle body. He cleaned the box out, installed a new filter, greased the filter gasket. I'll let Larry know that we may find even more silicon in his next sample due to the fact that silicon can show up just in the form of sealers and lubes when you're installing a new gasket. But thanks to sending in an oil sample, he was able to learn that there was an issue allowing excess dirt and debris to get past his air filter, something he never would have known about had he not sent in an oil sample. That's number one. Number two, we have Bert with a 1978 CJ5. Bert writes that he was convinced the engine had spun a bearing because of the repetitive sound of something spinning. Then it froze up. But since the report showed very little metal in the oil, he decided to keep looking, and it turns out the starter gear got stuck and was still engaged with the flywheel gear while the engine was running. Replace the starter, no more problems. And better yet, he knows that oil sharing components are getting along well. Thanks to Bert, thanks for Larry for the follow-ups. If you have a success story of oil analysis and what it did for you, the problems it helped you solve, or hopefully the problems that helped you rule out, feel free to reach out either by emailing us, bstone@blackstone-labs.com, or you can reach out over social media, Facebook, Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Kristin a little bit before we actually begin the interview. This was a big episode. So Kristin is Vice President of Blackstone Laboratories. So many would say this is sort of an overdue introduction into what is, in my opinion, an important figure not only to the history of Blackstone, but also an important figure for report writers in general. Kristin is kind of an example for all of us to follow in that her experiences before becoming a report writer, before becoming vice president, are similar to a lot of ours in that many of us have creative writing interests. We are content creators of some kind before we find our way to the stone, and that was the case for Kristin as well. We break down her experience from earning an English degree at Indiana University to becoming a magazine editor to finally ending up at Blackstone doing the thing that we all like to do here, which is produce the best oil reports in the industry with the well-written comments that our customers have come to expect. So this interview breaks it all down. You're going to learn a lot about Kristin. You're even going to learn some tidbits about my time as a young analyst and the learning process that goes along with an analyst when they're new to when they can reach that senior status and the growing pains or all of the education that is included in that journey and all the golden moments in between. We're going to break it all down with Kristin. So without further ado, here's Kristin and I in studio. First got there, he said it might be a wheel bearing. And I Googled cost of a wheel bearing repair, which I shouldn't. I was like, WebMD.
Well, I think it's like, it's not what it used to be. It used to be that you could just fix the wheel bearing, but now with more modern cars, it's a whole assembly. Mm-hmm. It's a whole thing.
So that's going through my head, whatever that may be. And then I get out there and they're like, oh, it's just a bad strut. Of course, we don't have the part, but you're fine to drive on it. It's no issue. And then I thought, I looked at the guy and I was like, so what am I looking at? And then he goes, it's free, brother.
What?
And I was like, what? He goes, car's under warranty. And I was like, yeah, I know. But I assumed like that was like internal stuff only. Like, it had to be an engine or transmission.
Uh-huh.
And then he goes, no.
That's awesome. Oh, my God.
It's amazing news. It was like
Wow.
awaiting a diagnosis and then finding
Wow.
out that you're like as healthy as a horse.
What year is that car?
21.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you have 3-year warranty?
Yeah, well, at least the duration of the lease, which is 3-year lease. But yeah, I got really lucky with that.
That's awesome.
I don't know.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So, want to talk about Bloomington just real quick. Are you going back soon?
We are. We're going to a football game the 24th, I think.
Oh, okay. I'm going to the MSU game in November.
We chose Rutgers because usually we win.
Yeah, we'll see this year. I don't know.
I know.
But when you go back to Bloomington, where do you go first, or where do you want to go first?
Well, usually we stop at Sophie's, wherever she's living, which last year was a dorm and this year is an apartment, just by the stadium.
Okay.
Like Varsity Villas area,
Sure.
Stadium Crossing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you're like, what brings back the good memories of Bloomington? Or
I really like going to the Union,
Yes.
which is funny because I didn't spend that much time in the Union when I was there.
Mm-hmm.
I did most of my studying in the library or at home, but man, I just love the Union.
Yeah,
I just
it's
love
great.
it.
Well, it has everything you need. Like you could do, that Tom Hanks movie, The Terminal?
Yes.
You could live in the Union just for as long as you needed to.
Yep. Yeah, and usually we walk around. We'll go to the fountain. We'll go to the art building right next to the fountain, which is Sophie's an art major.
Oh, cool.
So then we'll go to buildings. I spent a lot of time in Ballantyne because I was an English major. So
did it come as a shock to the family when you deviated and went to IU for English, or was that something that people expected you to do something different?
I don't know that they had any expectations, but Ryan and Dad tried to really play it up and make it a thing. And I'm just like, I just so did not care about sports or any kind of rivalry at all. And so they always would try to hype it, and I was just like, yeah, I don't care. Purdue can win. That's fine. I do not care.
So when you were in Bloomington and working on your degree, did you know what you wanted to write about, or was it just kind of a we'll wait and see?
No, I had no idea what to choose as a major, and I like to read, so I chose English. Mm-hmm. That was it.
Yeah. So in 2002, I think I read, which I wanted to talk to you ever since reading about you in Jim's article, Tales from the Oily Side, where he talked about. It's so cinematic, the way he describes bringing you on. He's like, it was a rainy night, another 12-hour day. We're tired. Ryan goes, what if we bring in Kristin? So what can you tell me about that time when they asked you to come on, or was there a pitch? Like, how is your first chapter at Blackstone go?
There was a pitch. I don't really remember the pitch very much, but I was working as an editor, and I was living in Michigan. So after I graduated from IU, I spent a few years waiting tables because I was done with all of it. But then eventually I became an editorial assistant at a veterinary magazine, and that was in Colorado. After that, Brad and I were getting married, and we decided that Colorado was a little too far from family. So I got a job editing a magazine in Michigan. And that's where I was working when Dad and Ryan approached me about working at Blackstone. And I really had no intention of ever joining Blackstone. I liked being an editor.
Yeah.
Although I did feel a little pigeonholed. I felt like my skill set was commas and word placement and, editing. And I wanted a little bit of a broader skill set. So we were living in Michigan, but we were still kind of far from our families, and it wasn't easy to just see any of our relatives. So I agreed to join Blackstone, and it was only meant to be temporary. It was only going to be because they had just bought Howard's company, Aviation Oil Analysis, and their business, the aircraft business, had really increased, and it was just Ryan and Dad writing reports at that time. They needed help. There was only like 5 people working here when I started. There was someone in the lab, someone on logins, Ryan, Dad, and Dad's wife at the time, Sue, on phones and billing.
So were you brought on as a report writer in name, or was it always kind of thought that you might help wherever you could?
In a small business, you do everything that needs to be done. And at that time, our sample volume was low enough that we only wrote reports in the afternoon. So I still had to do other things in the morning. But mainly I was brought on to help write reports. And the job was unformed at that time. I just kind of had to figure out what else I was going to do.
So what was the training like for you as a new report writer?
There was no training. There was only reading Ryan and Dad's reports, and that was it. And I just had to figure it out from there. And then they would tell me what I got wrong as I was writing them, but that was it.
That's so fascinating.
Reading other people's reports.
To that time.
Yeah.
So I think I can speak for probably most writers around here, honestly, when I say you're the personality of Blackstone, from the FAQs to so much of the comment, the Blackstone voice. But is that something you take ownership of, or do you see it more as you kind of continuing a legacy?
I think that I sort of started the cohesiveness of the Blackstone voice, but I find it interesting that the writers all borrow from each other, and various phrases and words will kind of become popular. Everybody just borrows from everyone else and starts using different phrases.
Definitely.
And phrases will come in and out of fashion. We'll say something for a few months and then we'll stop saying it, or saying it in a different way. It's interesting that way. So maybe I started it, but everybody borrows from everyone else.
I think sometimes we just get tired of reading certain things, and then we do away with phrases just for that reason.
Yes, for sure.
Due to the proofing process. But yeah, that's fascinating. So to you, what are the hallmarks of a well-written comment?
A well-written comment should give someone an idea, first of all, of how their engine is doing. Are we doing good? Are we doing bad? But it should also tell them where to go. If there's a problem, I think it should tell them at least point them in the direction of what they can do about it, and how much they need to worry. And that is the hardest part of writing a report, is walking that line between how much is this really something I need to pursue right now, and how much is it something I can just sit back and say, let's just see how it goes. I think a good comment will give a person that feeling, hopefully without them having to contact us and say and have us explain more.
Yeah. So when you look at sort of the Blackstone approach of being so open and available and kind of, we are easy to understand, is that something that when the company started was lacking in other labs, and you think that we kind of saw that void and were able to fill it? Or?
Yes, definitely. And that was Dad's vision, is making this something that everyday people can understand what's going on in their engine. We're not mechanics, and we don't always know exactly what's going on. But hopefully we can give somebody enough idea of what parts are wearing or what kind of contamination is present, that they at least have an idea of what to talk to their mechanic about to pursue it further.
So when he was dreaming up the company, what was your proximity to it? Did you hear talk of it, or when did oil analysis kind of enter your consciousness, I guess?
Well, he started the company when I was 14, so I didn't really understand anything about it probably until my 20s, and probably not really until I started working here.
Yeah.
But Dad used to bring home, we had a typewriter at home in our Florida room, and he would write reports at home, or he would ask me to rewrite reports if he had made a mistake, because it was a typewriter and it was on carbon copy. And so if you made a mistake, you had to start over again.
Oh, man. Yeah. So when you came on and you were writing reports, how many do you think you would write on a typical day?
Me personally, or the whole company?
You personally.
Oh, gosh. Well, we were busy, and I was a good typist. And I was an English major, so I could crank it out. I didn't always know what I was talking about, but I could write them. I don't know. I don't really remember, but I remember when we would do 3 runs in a day, and that was a lot. And there was 3 of us, so I would assume that I was probably not doing a whole run. Ryan and Dad could do more than I could, so I was probably doing 18 reports in a day.
it's great because when I came on, I remember we'd have a couple 4 or 5 run days, and looking at that and being like, oh, what are we gonna do?
How are we gonna get through all this work? God.
Later on. But so like, what informed, with your dad seeing that need to be, easy to understand and wanting to, folks to see these results and be able to make sense of them. What do you think informed like his writing style? Was he doing anything akin to report writing before this?
Oh yeah, Dad was a writer.
Okay.
He wrote stories. He's been a writer all his life.
Interesting. So I read his newsletters and they're great, but never in any of his newsletters, I think, did he mention that side of him.
Yeah, he was never, he didn't pursue being published, but he would write short stories. He would write letters all the time. I mean, yes, very prolific.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because he went to school for engineering as well.
Yep.
So it was just something that he just kept up with as a hobby.
I think so. I think that's where I got it is from him.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, because I think that like you and Ryan both have this sort of like Josh described it as swashbuckling nature to the comment, where there's always like you can always detect this personality.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting to know where it came from.
Yeah, that's definitely straight dad. In fact, sometimes we have, I don't know if you've mentioned this before, but we have a function in the database where you can see past comments that people have written and tailor it to your current report or use that as a springboard for what you're writing. And I can always tell Dad's comments when I see them. I remember one, he said, if this engine was a horse, we'd shoot it.
I think that like Ryan is like it's like a blunt, not as blunt of a style, but you could definitely pick up that same sort of tone, which is really fun. So what do you think beyond, his reports, Ryan's reports, what do you think informs your writing style?
I like to have fun when I write. I like for people on the other end to know that there's a person behind this. I think so often in corporate America, you don't get the feel that there are people behind any of it. But of course there are. There's people behind all of it, behind the phones, behind the computer systems, behind the apps, behind the website. There's always people behind all of it. And I like for us to be immediately visible, whether it's on the phone or in the report. Sometimes we'll sign our names to the report so that the person on the other end knows who to ask for. But I like for it to be relatable. I like for it to be understandable. And I like for the person on the other end to know that they're talking to a real person.
Do you think that it's important for a writer to sort of exercise, that muscle outside of the office?
Yes, for sure. In fact, when we interview new potential writers, I like to ask them if they're readers because I think they're reading a broad variety. It doesn't matter what, but hopefully you're reading a lot of things and that increases your vocabulary. It helps your sentence structure. It just makes you a more well-rounded writer overall if you're reading.
But when I'm outside the office, I think ever since starting this job, I really gravitated towards nonfiction. Just to inform, I don't know, sentence structure, the way, the voice of the comments I write. Do you have one lane you prefer to stay in, or?
I'm definitely a fiction person.
Yeah.
As an English major, of course, it's mostly literary fiction, but I do read some nonfiction. I just picked up a Mary Roach book at the library. She delves in. Have you heard of Mary Roach? It's very interesting. She delves into the science behind all kinds of things. She wrote one about death.
Yeah.
The one I just picked up is about animals, and it's about how this. I don't know. I haven't read it yet. It's about when humans and animals meet. How it. I don't know. I'll have to read it and see.
An interaction of sorts.
Yes, but her books are super interesting. So I do like nonfiction, but it has to be well written.
Yeah.
Sort of reads like fiction, nonfiction.
Exactly. Yeah, I understand that completely. Like, unless it's like something where it has to be attached to something I'm passionate about already. Like if it's a nonfiction book about like I have 13, maybe even more like Bob Dylan books, and it's only because I can attach to all the music I've listened to over the years.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, well, I'm interested in this. And also it has a narrative because like Bob Dylan is a big liar. Like all of his interviews are just, he makes shit up about, his childhood, everything. So it will be like this investigation of his narrative. So it's like, oh, well, that's fun because it's not just like reading an ingredients label.
Right.
You know?
I think the narrative is what I like about fiction or well-written nonfiction. And one thing that I use fiction for is when I wake up in the middle of the night and I cannot go back to sleep, going through a story in your head from the beginning to wherever you're at is a good way to fall back asleep.
Yeah, no, that's interesting too. So that kind of beat me to the punch on Brett had a couple of bonus questions that we were going to ask, which is it's not going to be the alphabet thing. I don't know if you've listened to the Samir episode, but she wanted me to ask Samir what his favorite sequence of the alphabet was.
I love Brett.
To harken back to that, just because you'll appreciate this, and listeners probably will too. I asked Samir that question, and then he paused, and then he gives a very polite grin while he's thinking about whatever he's going to say back to that. And he goes, probably XYZ because it's the end. and it was funny the way he said it, but when I typed it out to Brett, that answer, she goes, "That's great. Also, someone should check on him." But her question for you, she wanted to ask what a great book is that you've read recently and what an awful book is that you've read recently, because she knows you're a big reader also.
A great book that I've read recently is The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one.
Oh, my God. It's top 5 for me. It's probably top 3 for me in my whole life. An awful book that I've read recently. Well, the book that I'm reading now is not great, and it gives you the point of view of the dog as well as the other characters, if that gives you an idea of where we're at in this book. And I'm skimming large chunks of it just to see where it goes.
Are you a completionist where you might see that it's headed down a bad road, but you just want to get there anyway?
Life is too short for bad books.
Okay. Good. Oh, man. So one other thing I did want to ask, just because I'm curious what your thoughts are, I think it's fair to consider you a trailblazer in several regards. You may not hold yourself up that high, but I think several of us do. Because obviously, I think it's a surprise to a lot of folks when they find out how their engine is doing and the writer is a woman, or we pick up the phone and it's a woman describing how their engine is doing. So I can only imagine that it was even more so that way when you started. Do you take any pride in sort of being the first in the building in that regard, and then also kind of being an example to follow?
I don't know about pride so much as just I'm used to it, and it was a little bit difficult at first when somebody on the other end, I would get comments like, "Oh, I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to someone who knows about my engine." Or, people automatically assume you're a secretary when you pick up the phone. So now I answer the phone and I'll, when I get a call about a report, I'll say, "This is Kristin. I wrote this report. How can I help you?"
Yeah.
And that sets them straight right off the bat. But I do think that my experience is helpful when we hire other women analysts, which seems like we have more and more women, mainly because we aim to hire people who can write, and a lot of times that's women straight away. And I do usually talk to them at some point about the fact that they might face some kind of sexism when they're talking to people on the phone.
Yeah.
I remember Amanda had a problem on Facebook. We posted it. That's what it was. We posted it to Facebook. She had a problem where she told a person he wanted to know what kind of oil to use.
Yeah.
And she said, "Well, I use blah, blah, blah." And on the other end, the guy was like, "No, I want to know what the guys use."
Just not even a hint of nuance to it.
Nope. And so you do get that. And I have counseled some of our female analysts before when they've encountered someone who's been rude. Reagan one time had a guy who went off and demanded that she explain how an engine works to him to prove that she could do it. And she came into my office and she was pretty teary, and I said, go out, take some time, walk around. You'll get that. So I don't know that I'm proud about being the trailblazer, but I'm glad that I can help people who are walking the same road.
Mm-hmm. Which is, all that's Reagan is arguably one of the smartest people I've ever met. So it's wild. But when we're on this side, obviously we know each other a lot better.
Yeah, it shakes you. It shakes you getting doubted like that. And it's if you don't have a strong enough personality or enough faith in yourself, it can shake your own confidence. But Reagan knows what she's talking about.
Yeah.
She wouldn't be a senior analyst if she didn't. None of you guys would be senior analysts if you didn't know what you're talking about.
So for us to become seniors, I think the general rule of thumb has always been about a year of just experiencing everything there is, because like you need that amount of time to stumble upon everything, whether it's industrial or aircraft or weird stuff.
A year before we'll consider you, a year to 2 years before you're really ready for it.
Yeah, exactly. And I wonder, has that held true like ever since the beginning? I mean, were you about it a couple years, or how would you describe your own evolution?
Well, we didn't really have senior analysts when I started. I mean, it was just Ryan and Dad and me. But the rule was you when you can prove your own, that was sort of like becoming a senior analyst, which is still a rule we have today. I don't really remember how long it took me. It seemed like I'm sure it was at least a year.
Yeah.
The thing is, when we hire analysts, most of them don't know anything about engines, and that's actually how we like it, because if they think they know things about oil, they're probably wrong. Mostly what people know is just marketing hype put out by the oil companies. So it takes a while to unlearn that. But still, even if you know something about engines, we do such a broad range of things here that you could never know all there is to know. So once you get over the fear of, oh my gosh, how am I going to fill this comments box, you still might not know, you might not have enough depth to really be able to explain things in a way that we need a senior analyst to be able to explain them. So that's where the second year comes in. After a year, you've seen most of what you need to see, but you might be writing superficial reports. What we want is someone who will take the time and really focus on the analysis part of it. Okay, something is a little bit off, but why would that be? Or do I need, if copper's up by 3 parts per million, is that something I should really talk about? Maybe. It depends on the situation, but probably not. So it takes a whole nother year to gain the depth that you can really talk comfortably about all the variety of things that we do here. 2 years is pretty normal for most people.
Yeah. When you look at reports, I'm wondering, because this is definitely true for me, I don't know if it's true for everyone. Can you remember or recall back to similar data instances, examples where when you were learning, you're like, oh, I'm looking at this set of results. I remember getting a note on how I wrote about it years ago, and it will inform how you approach it today. I can recall pretty much every note I think you or Ryan have given me on here's how to handle this report, or you wrote it this way, let's think about it another way. Can you still remember back when you were learning how you were taught to handle this situation or that situation?
No, because it was so loosey-goosey back then. We didn't have any kind of standard training. We didn't have any kind of standard feedback system. And it was just, Ryan would walk over and say, oh, this is wrong because blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, oh, okay, and change it. And then, I don't know, it just sort of all eventually gelled in my head. But no, I don't really remember anything specific.
It clicks in a weird way. It really does. Because I remember you were talking about a 3 parts per million increase in copper. Should we make note of that? And I just remembered there was one time where I was dealing with I think it was an industrial sample or maybe a generator. And there was 7 parts per million of silicon. And I wrote a whole comment about a massive air filtration problem. And I remember you were like, it's 7 parts per million. Do you really think that caused all of that? And then I was like, no, it didn't.
I remember giving you a comment one time that I felt like after that was kind of a turning point for you. The computer marks things that are twice average automatically, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a problem.
Right.
And new analysts are understandably gun shy about deciding whether or not this needs to be marked or not. It takes a while to get the confidence. And I remember you had a report where say, I don't remember what it was, say iron 7 parts per million higher than average, and
Sure.
and the computer had highlighted it, and you left it highlighted. And I remember saying to you, I would like to see you be bolder about deciding that this does not need to be marked and just go on with it. And I felt, and you did, and you took that and you ran with it, and I really felt then you leveled up. And it's funny because when somebody becomes a senior analyst, you can see it in their reports. They level up. It's not a surface level thing anymore. You can really see the depth start to grow.
Yeah.
And that's when you know somebody's on the right track.
Yeah, there are definitely choices that are made. And like, I think this feels kind of condescending in a way, but they become more fun to read.
Yeah.
It's
for
like,
sure.
early on, you're in the weeds and you're working through all these corrections. And then all of a sudden you're like, I enjoy reading these reports, and I think that's always a sign that they either, they may not even know it yet, but like they've reached a new area of growth.
And it's a confidence thing because most people don't know anything about anything when they start here. And so you're starting from ground zero. So it really is, you have to gain a lot of knowledge, but also gain confidence in yourself that you know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I think a lot of like customers, listeners of the show would be surprised to know that when we put marks on the report, like that is a choice. That's not merely because we let a program walk us around.
Right.
Because I think you brought up that. I remember that instance also, Ryan telling me when he told me that there was programming that could suggest highlights and the rationale behind it, but that the analyst has the decision to make. That was like a big turning point too, was understanding that you can defy programming and actually you should.
Yes, absolutely. And that's an important thing that distinguishes us from other companies is just that someone is thinking about every single one of those numbers and whether or not to talk about it or whether it's okay.
Yeah, because it's not even, you don't even have to call out labs by name because I think I've never seen another comment say not only that level is high, but where it's coming from and what are the surrounding explanations that could apply.
And what you might need to do about it.
Yeah, exactly. Taking all that into consideration. So just to wrap it up, when you're not writing reports, what is your preferred creative activity outside the office to scratch that creative itch?
Gardening.
Really?
Yeah. Yep, I'm a master gardener, and I try to be outside every day, preferably with my hands in the soil. But the plants change every day, and I like going out and seeing how they've changed, deciding what I'm going to change, what might be different for next year, how to make my yard more beautiful.
That's perfect because I don't know. I feel like everyone has had such varied answers, which is really great. Like Miranda paints and like writes poetry and stuff. So and like we both cook and all of that. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been really fun, Kristin.
No, thanks, Joe.
All right, that was Kristin and I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. I think we got into a lot of interesting conversations just about Blackstone, our individual report writing journeys, kind of how we've grown into the writers we are today. And before I let you all go, I wanted to thank you for the engagement we've had so far on episode 100. The response has been incredible. So it is the most successful launch of an episode we've had so far in the history of this show. And we can't thank you all enough for making that happen. Over the course of 100 episodes, we're still finding ways to top what we've done before, and we're going to strive to continue to do that. And as always, if you like what you heard, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. This is Blackstone Joe, signing off.
The Slick Talk podcast is powered by Blackstone Laboratories. If you're ready to start your oil analysis journey, visit blackstone-labs.com to order your free test kit.